Welcome to the Hopevale podcast. I'm Tamara, Schlatter, the Bay City Campus Director, and we are diving into our current sermon series, Kingdom Manifesto, Revolution of the Blessed. We're almost to the end of this series, and we're talking about the blessing that comes from persecution because of righteousness when we follow Jesus. I'm joined today by, and I quote, our ridiculously good-looking Senior Pastor Josh Pardee. Although I might have to argue that statement with what you're wearing today.
All right. You
worked it into two sermon series in a row.
Which means I think we have to, 2 sermons in a row. Yeah, I gotta lay that one. I had no plans to do that. Sometimes it's just like, people are tracking with me and then, I want to.
We're talking about persecution. Is it okay that I razz you a little?
Yeah, we needed to lighten it. You gotta come up for air every now and then. But then, yes, today
that's a loud shirt.
It's very loud, and you can see us on YouTube. But I don't have. America won the gold yesterday, so I was trying to figure out how to celebrate.
For hockey.
Yes,
Yep.
yes. I was thinking about going to every Tim Hortons in town, and then just. When they asked for my order, just chanting USA, but I felt like that would be a little inappropriate.
That doesn't sound like peacemaking. Do you need to listen to last week's message?
This is why we need the scriptures, and this is why I have to follow Jesus, because left to my own devices, who knows where I would go. So then I was like, well, what's the most American thing I can wear? And I do have this old hockey sweater from my youth group days of the Mighty Ducks. And I felt like if I don't have a USA sweater, that's one thing. But Mighty Ducks is very that's one of the more American sweaters you can wear, I feel like. So there we go. That was my dress decision for today.
Okay, well, let's move from the Mighty Ducks to the Chronicles of Narnia.
Okay,
you opened your sermon with a quote from the Chronicles of Narnia and translated that essentially into saying Jesus isn't safe, but he is good.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you're explaining that in the context of Jesus being high invitation and high challenge. But I started thinking about the person who's already living in a world that doesn't feel safe. Things are unstable. They don't want more challenge in their life. They need hope. So how would you talk to that person?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I had a couple just conversations about that too, because if you're, and I don't even know all the circumstances of the context of where people were asking the questions, but it's along that line of thinking. And so that's where I want to take Jesus at his words and try and, to the best that I can, represent them in all the ways that I think of what they mean. So what I would want to say is, by safe, he is safe in the sense that you can come to him with all of yourself and you can trust him. But I think the delineation that we get in Chronicles of Narnia is helpful for us of what we mean and what we don't mean by that. So if we mean what we should mean, I think, is that he's good. Mm-hmm. What we don't mean is safety. We can add on all sorts of feelings or just things that we want to envision for our own lives of what safe means. So safe could mean, if you're taking it too far, that, well, if Jesus is that way, then it means that he wants, me to live in a house with a white picket fence and 2.5 children and have a flowing retirement account.
Prosperity gospel.
Yeah, it could be prosperity, it could be health, it could be like that there should be no sort of hardship because he's safe. So why isn't he me? And I think that there are some times where we do struggle to take Jesus on his terms, not because Jesus hasn't been clear about who he is, but because we have put a lot of our own expectations on what we think he should be. So I think that's where the delineation of safe and good is really helpful. Because again, Jesus, and I tried to highlight it during the sermon, of Jesus does not live a safe life by any marker that we would use. There's a reality where he's being cared for by actually really wealthy women who are kind of like funding his ministry. There's passages we read about how he has no place to lay his head. Like, these are things that we wouldn't say are safe. And then ultimately, when we get to the end of his life, he's hanging on a cross, right? So we can't mean safety in that sense that we, I think, attach a lot of things. So that's where I think the word good is better. So it does mean, because he's good, that he's not going to harm you, or he's not going to, if you've gone through something traumatic or you've experienced some sort of abuse, or, that's not what we're saying about Jesus. we're saying is he is good and he will meet you in that. But this call of the Christian life, and I think we have seen it through the Beatitudes from the beginning, it is high invitation, but it ends high challenge. And so you do have to kind of keep the context of everything in all of that, of where we've been in the sermon series. Because I think as we began, we did, when we talk about blessed are the poor in spirit and blessed who are mourn, those who mourn, we were talking about someone who's deeply, intimately knows us and that we can trust with those things. And so that's true. But then also on the back end of that, there's this way of living that he is going to call. It is an upside down kingdom. It's a counter kingdom. And so there's some danger to it. It's risky.
Yeah. So, I mean, if somebody just stepped in yesterday, they really need to go back and listen to the full sermon series.
Yeah.
Go back to the start, because when you zoom in too tightly on anything, you're probably going to miss something. But I think it really ties into what you're trying to say, really ties into the quote from Bonhoeffer that Jesus bids a man to come and die, right? And so ultimately we're all, you said this even in your sermon, we're all working towards something. We're all living towards something. Is it leading us to death or is it leading us to life? And so, yes, Jesus may be calling us to death, but there's life on the other side of it. And so when I think about the person that maybe isn't feeling safe and is experiencing a bunch of challenges in life, you're already experiencing something heavy and burdensome. Jesus is saying, hey, bring it to me. Let me carry those burdens, and then you live my way instead.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I mean, Jesus will talk about this idea of how his yoke is light, right? Which is like this way of, in agricultural, you have the yoke that goes on the oxen, and there's this way of talking about the other teachers are burdensome. The other rabbis that are going around are trying to basically out self-righteous each other, of showing how, look at all, we don't even come close to that fence. We built another fence, sort of a thing. And Jesus is not trying to be burdensome or weigh you down with religion. And man, the power of who Jesus is like, you can come to him with the pain and the brokenness, and he will encounter, he will meet you in that. Like you can encounter him in that.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you also did like a whole flyover of the Beatitudes yesterday.
Yeah. I was trying to cover a lot.
Covering a lot in 60 seconds there. But you said that Jesus didn't just teach them, he actually lived them. And so it made me realize how much we turn scriptures like this, or scripture in general, into a list of things to do, like behavior modification over heart transformation. And so I just loved how you kind of like brought that to light. And you were talking about how, Jesus's life really portrays these Beatitudes. And so what stands out to you about the way he lived these? Is there anything in particular that really stands out to you?
Man, I don't know if there's anything particular that stands out to me. I think for me, the fun part is like stepping back and seeing how he lives out all of those things. Because I think we're used to people who are just kind of teaching us what we should do, but then go and do their own thing. Like we're used to seeing that from different leaders or political figures or pop culture people, like they virtue signal, they say, hey, do all of these things. And then you find out like they weren't doing any of them, And so the fact that Jesus' life leads to someone who is actually living out, and I do think he's kind of shaping his self-portrait, his biography sort of a thing here, to me, I just look at the whole thing, and it's profound to me to see like, oh, there isn't just like one of these themes that he really lives into or whatever. These are eight different ideas and topics and ways of being in this world and understanding his kingdom, and he's the one who's like modeling that and really trusting it. So yeah, maybe I'd flip the question back even to you. Like, is there a part of it that really sticks out to you and that you resonate with?
Well, what came to mind, in thinking about the behavior modification versus heart transformation. Somebody once told me, and I try and live by this in my role, is teach people Jesus and then let Jesus teach people. We often want to correct everybody's behavior and instead of like just teaching them about Jesus. And I feel like that's what you're doing in this sermon series. And that's what Jesus was doing in his sermon is he's just trying to teach people the way of the kingdom and then say, come and follow me. Not you need to correct this and you need to correct that.
Yeah.
But just, hey, here's a model of what he's talking about it, and then he goes and actually does it. And so I actually had a conversation with somebody after service yesterday. They're in a mentor relationship, and they had a pushback type of conversation, trying to, and I know the heart behind the mentor is trying to really shape this other person's heart, but there was a pushback on behavior. And so this is what I said. My encouragement is teach this person Jesus, and then let Jesus teach them the things. And so when we're having a difficult conversation with somebody, Jesus modeled grace and truth. So how do I then model grace and truth when I have a conversation with somebody?
Yeah, I think that's like the heart of it. At least that's even how I do try and teach or lead pastorally or all of those different things is I just want to introduce you to Jesus because there's a way of thinking about discipleship, mentorship, teaching, all of the different things, leading, where my evaluation of what is successful is how you behave, and specifically how you behave about certain markers that I have prioritized that I think are most important. And they maybe even for good reason. Like maybe this is how Jesus encountered me or really changed me. Like you find with most people, like, I mean, I could do it probably with a good portion of our staff and our pastoral staff of like, there's certain topics where you can tell like they just light up about certain things. And that's because Jesus really ministered to them in profound ways, which is amazing. But the temptation sometimes, especially when you're a leader, is to start prescribing that to other people and that they have to go on the same journey that you went on. And there are for sure things that are common, but ultimately I'm not trying to make, even, in our Apprenticing Jesus course, like I tell people, like, I'm not trying to turn you into me. You're not called to be me. Right. I'm called to be me. You're called to be you, and we have to figure out who's Jesus in you and what does he want to be stirring. And so maybe even in my own transformation, the thing that Jesus needed to start with, whatever the topic was, whatever, if it was faith, if it was sin, if it was a specific sin, if it was obedience, like whatever it was, maybe that's what I needed to start with, but that's like number 27 of what you need to get to. And number 35 of what I need to get to is actually number 1 of what you need to get to. So like you just get in, sometimes I've been in like Christian spaces and churches and ministries, and they do amazing work. I'm not trying to be critical, but it's like everyone has the same prescribed plan. And it, the interesting thing is it usually works for a while because it's like, oh yeah, now we're developing common culture and language and all these different things. But it seems to, in the long run, eventually collapse because as soon as the leader isn't the one doing it and like pushing their kind of like, agenda is a little bit stronger word than I want to use, but like their prescribed path forward, maybe is how I want to put that. It falls apart. And so I think the more faithful way is for me or whoever you're leading to try and discern what is Jesus doing right now in this person's life and what is their next yes. Like that's how I always frame it. And your next yes is going to be different than mine. Yeah. I mean, you and I both have lots of lobby conversations on a Sunday, right? And each one of those conversations is completely different because each person is at a different place. And so, it's interesting, like even as like one of the communicators here is people are responding to the things that I'm saying, but how they're interacting with it, they have different questions based off of their location and what it means. And I think that's actually, that's right. That's true. That's contextual. I would even argue like theologically, that's incarnational. Like this is, Jesus comes to us in a context. Yeah. He comes as a Jewish man in first century Palestine. Like that's the context he comes in. You can't make him in a different context. Okay.
A lot of things going on that you said that I want to talk about. Jesus does a work in us. And it should show up in the way we interact with other people, but it doesn't mean that we need to take that same work and try and do that work in somebody else. It's always Jesus's work to do, not our work to do. So that should show up in our relationships. But it made me think about when my kids were first born, really little, preschool age, I was looking at homeschooling. We lived in Florida at the time, and so there was a lot of people all around us homeschooling. And I went to a homeschool convention, and they talked about how we tend to teach to our learning style instead of the student's learning style. But if a student's really going to learn, you have to teach to their learning style. And so I think that's kind of what I'm hearing in this. It's really personal when we're interacting with somebody. We can't just take what Jesus is doing in us and put it on somebody else.
Yeah, and that's where we would use language of, I mean, like, again, in the course that my wife and I teach, it's apprenticing Jesus, right? Like, it's literally thinking of an apprenticeship model where you are the one following him and he's meeting you in that context.
Yeah, we're not following Josh.
Right.
Josh is pointing us to Jesus to go follow Josh.
Yeah, we're not getting far if you're going to follow me. It's going to be bad.
Okay, I want to go back to another thing that you said. You talked about how each staff person probably lights up in some different area because God did a work in them. So that made me think of your candidating weekend.
Okay.
And you got to come to Bay City first, actually, and have your little town hall meeting. And Nate asked you a whole bunch of questions, and you did a great job answering them. But then you started talking about the kingdom.
Yeah.
And prior to that, you were like, you could tell you were nervous, and you're like rubbing your hands on your legs, and you're doing a great job answering them. Then you started talking about the kingdom, and you came alive. And that was amazing to see. And I was like, that's our guy. And I told Nate, I'm like, do him a favor. When you get to Saginaw, start with that. Lead with that question and then go to all the others, because people will see his heart instantly. He'll come alive instantly. And all of your nerves just completely washed away. So tell me, where does that stem from? Where was the work in your life that Jesus did that, brings this light to your eyes when you start talking about the kingdom?
That's a great question. Wow, that was a while ago too.
It was.
That was fun.
3 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago. Man, I would say the way I always explain this story is I grew up in a Christian household. My parents are missionaries. Kudos to them. Even though they ran a Christian camp, they always had us in church on the weekends. If one of them had to stay back because we had a retreat in, the other one was taking us to church, and just very involved in the local congregation. And again, I would, for anyone, I would wish they could have the childhood that I did. Not that I was perfect or whatever, but like just looking back on all of the things that I got to experience and learn and be a part of and different things. I went to Bible school. I lived, though, in this space in Christianity and the church where I think it was kind of the first part of this conversation of what we were talking about, of like, it is more about like, you have to do these certain things, not do these certain things. And there's kind of like an in and an out. And not that it was even always stated with words, but it's just like you get into a part of these groups, right? And you pick up quickly like what's accepted, what's not, what we kind of roll our eyes at, what we celebrate. And so I did all the things. I went to Bible school. I got the degrees. I was working in the church. I had the job, all that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, and Brandy and I would talk about this, I feel like I talked about this recently, of just like, there's a moment where we had, I did a couple weeks ago, where we were just evaluating our own lives. We're like, we're doing everything, but we are not growing in love, nor are we growing in joy or peace or patience or like any of the fruit of the Spirit. Like I know the answers. I can tell you different things. But I'm not personally being transformed. And it was feeling a little, it's the type of death that we talked about yesterday in the sermon. But very like dry and just like, is this the best news that we have or not? And so I got, that kind of sent us down a path, and we were just involved in different conversations and stuff. And I got introduced to the idea of like, how do we understand that the kingdom is present here and now? Not fully, but it is here. And that just radically changed everything, because, and I'd say this, like, I would go to church on Sunday. At that time I was a youth pastor. One of the nights of ministry was Sunday night. So Sundays were a big day, but the thing that I most lived for on a Sunday was the Detroit Lions, and like it most impacted my mood of whether I was excited or upset or whatever. It was the thing that, we're in church, but really that's kind of what I'm thinking about. And
checking the clock.
yeah,
Okay,
exactly.
we gotta get home.
That's exactly it. And we were in Central Time Zone, so those games kick at
no.
noon, not at 1. And so, the more that I leaned into the kingdom and that I started seeing, it was just a different paradigm. And it was, it was like the new wineskins, the new mercies that I needed for that moment. And it literally changed everything. And it wasn't like overnight, but over the course of a couple of years, it was like, oh, this makes me rethink all of this stuff and reevaluate all of this stuff. And so, there is a part of me that's just like, it's deeply wired in my, like, the soul of who I am. And I think once I understood, I'm like, oh, this is, there's different streams of theology where people like are highlighting different things and they almost overemphasize it to show its importance. And there's an important reason why you do that. I'm not, again, being critical of it, but like when it gets to the kingdom, this is literally what Jesus is talking about.
Yeah.
And for some reason, I didn't understand that for a good 24, 25 years of my life and trying to put all of that together. And once I got the understanding that the kingdom is present, it's already here, but it's not fully here, that changed everything. And now, like, the things that give me most life are pursuing those things and looking for those things. So yeah, it's been just a radical paradigm shift in my life.
Do you think it's kind of inevitable as you start to follow Jesus to try and shape your life and figure out the characteristics of what does this mean, and that's just a natural progression, that as Jesus is leading you, that you come into this revelation of the kingdom? Or do you think it's a miss in the church that we're not presenting it that way?
Yeah, I would lean towards the latter personally. I mean, which is why we teach it around here, right?
Yeah.
And it's so a part of everything that we talk about. Because I think without the understanding of the kingdom, you just start getting a little wonky. That's a very theological term, wonky. But you get a little wonky in emphasizing things like, there was a movement about when I was kind of in the college scene of like glory and God's glory. And that it was really good, but it moved people to a place that I think without like a heading of kingdom and what that means, it leads you down a path that I don't think is all of what Jesus did. And so, I think like, so even, we were talking about how yesterday's sermon was high challenge. I think part of what the kingdom calls you to do is to take Jesus on his terms. And I do think that a lot of times we are naturally inclined to turn Jesus into the part that we most resonate with, which isn't wrong or bad.
Right.
But if you're a more disciplined truth person, like you're just really like, let's just create caricatures, you're really regiment, like some of my friends, I mean, they wake up at 5:30, they have their their tea or their water or coffee, like they have
same time every day,
boiled chicken for lunch at 11:30, and it's just like they are just, they're machines almost. Well, if that's who you are, that's great, but you're probably, without the kingdom, you're going to kind of lean into a very kind of stiff version of who God is, because that's how you relate to him. And that's not wrong, but it's also, then if we go on the other side of the spectrum and you're the person who like is very grace-filled and doesn't have strong, like you could kind of be convinced you live in the gray. What's that?
The Holy Spirit will blow us in any direction we need to go.
Yeah, you could have, that for sure, that part. Or even just like if you're someone, I'm thinking of like who's the opposite of like lives in the gray and you're more good with tension and less black and white. Well, then you're going to be like, hey, just, it doesn't matter what you think or what you just come be a part of it. And so again, that's not picking on either of those, but if we understand that under the headline of the kingdom, then it's like, okay, I think Jesus is high invitation and he is high challenge. So when we're talking about poor in spirit, he's literally saying like, come you who have nothing to offer. This is good news for you. You're peasants sitting on a hillside who have no voice. And I'm inviting you into a kingdom that's going to revolutionize the world.
Yeah.
That's the beginning.
Yeah.
But by the end, we're at like high challenge. So I think it's just trying to like, the kingdom helps us keep perspective on where Jesus is. And there are there are tensions that we have to manage throughout the kingdom where two things are true simultaneously. Yeah. And I think a lot of times we have our own disposition that we want to lean one way or lean the other way. I think of, another example of this would be like prayer. People pray the way that a lot of times we enter into prayer is like, some of us really love prayer because we're just more contemplative and we like to sit in the silence, and that feels very like connecting to us. Others of us, we're like on the go and we're like, this is really difficult. You know what I mean? And so like, even the way we do all of these disciplines, it's not right or wrong. And you're going to have like your own language, and that's good, but it's like, how do we zoom out and have a bigger perspective on it, I think.
Yeah, I like what you said about keeping the kingdom in perspective helps us to realize where Jesus actually is, and that he is here and now. And if you think that the kingdom is just for after this life, it really leaves this life lacking.
Right.
It really loses the motivation to pursue these things, right? And so it kind of leans into the difference of Jesus as Savior versus Jesus as King. Yeah. You know, Savior doesn't require anything from us. It's a free gift. Right. But King requires us to be a people in his kingdom.
Yeah, it's a free gift that costs everything. Yeah. It's kind of like the idea behind it. And so again, I don't want to loosen the tension of grace really is a free gift. You really can't earn it. Yeah. Totally true. And that's where I think Bonhoeffer is really helpful, and part of what we talked about yesterday of like, he is living in a cultural moment where people are living what he's calling cheap grace, and they're
not doing anything.
Yeah. It's kind of like a name it and claim it sort of, hey, we're Christians, but we can basically just baptize whatever the emperor wants to do. Yeah. And that's fine. And Bonhoeffer and a select few other Christians leaders are like, no, you can't do this. You have to follow Jesus, and it may cost you everything.
Yeah. Yeah, so you bring up Bonhoeffer again and the cultural times there. And so that makes me think about the tension that we're living in our world, and the differences of what you talked about yesterday of what's actually persecution and what's not. So we live in divided times, and if you disagree with me, then you must be persecuting me. Yeah. So how does persecution coming from living the way of Jesus reshape how we interpret that type of pushback?
Yeah, I think the type of persecution Jesus is talking about is specifically about resistance to his way of living in the world. And I do think we get confused on that because, first of all, we think any sort of resistance in our life means... I've been in spaces, I'm not saying it's true of everyone, but I've been in spaces where Christians can feel like any sort of resistance means that it is persecution because of that. And I don't think that is true. I think there are different I think there's different spaces where that can be true. I didn't have time to get into it yesterday, but the reality is we live in a world where there is extreme persecution of Christians, and some of our global partners here at his church, I mean, they are in dangerous situations where if their identities are found out, it probably means they're going to lose their life or at least be imprisoned. There's huge persecution right now in Africa that is breaking out. And so sometimes we live in spaces where there's such a lack of persecution in some senses that we're just looking to name any sort of resistance as persecution. So I just want to be careful and mindful that we don't do that. I think the persecution is if it is directly because you are living in the way of the kingdom, meaning you are living like Jesus. And so I don't see Jesus being a jerk. I don't see him being just rude. He's very frank sometimes. The people that he seems to be the hardest though on are the religious leaders. It's not the sinners and the tax collectors and the Roman soldiers and all of those. And he's very focused on what he is called to do and the work that he is called to be a part of. And so I would just want to make sure that when we're talking about persecution, that's what we mean. And I think I think there's a way, like, we need to examine even culturally where we've been, because there is a reality in our context where we've been a country for 250 years, where we had, even as Christians, and I should maybe even say as Protestant Christians, have had a lot of power in politics and the shaping of policy and all of those sorts of things at different moments. It's certainly ebbed and flowed. And so I think sometimes we're at a cultural moment right now where we live in a plural society, pluralistic society. We live in a country where we have a constitution that protects the rights of everyone, and we're a republic, like a democracy republic sort of thing. And so that means that everyone gets a voice at the table. And so sometimes when you lose cultural power, it's really easy to just start immediately associating that with persecution, especially when we have to, I'm just going to keep naming this for us, especially when we live in a world where clicks and likes are monetized, and where we have voices that are so accessible, that are, they know. I was just listening to an interview by somebody, and I can't remember. It was like a Yale professor or somebody like that. Was like, listen, we know that it used to be that sex sells, and now we know that rage sells more. And so we're just living in a time where we're constantly being, as the kids say, rage baited.
Yes, yes, fully aware of
This is what it's like to be parents of young kids.
We had a full-on conversation about rage baiting at dinner last night, in which everybody was rage baited, and we did not act like Christians.
This is where repentance and all of that good stuff of Jesus. But I bring all that up to say, like, there are moments where when you live in this cultural moment, and when you have these voices telling you you're being persecuted, I totally understand why we get there. But what I want to do is, like, this is where we have to lean on Jesus and understand, okay, so what does this actually mean? And what does this actually look like? And I think once you kind of disentangle that a little bit and begin to separate it, it's like, okay, so just because someone has a different political view doesn't mean that I'm being persecuted, right? And actually, they are entitled to their opinion. Like, I'm very grateful to live in a country that has our Constitution and has protection for different opinions. I'm grateful for people who have different opinions, not because I think that they're right.
Right.
I just think that it makes us better in the end to force this into conversation. And I think that's the beauty of part of the American project, is if we can keep doing that, that is different than how the world has basically operated for all of human history, where you pick up a sword and you go fight each other. And it's just, a will to power. Whoever's the strongest is the one who gets to dominate all of those sorts of things. And I don't think that that's the way of the kingdom. So, but I also, again, I just want to be clear, like, not all of this is us being persecuted. And so I think it cheapens the lives and the faith of our brothers and sisters who actually are being persecuted when we falsely, claim persecution for ourselves. And so I don't want to do that. And I want to protect us from quickly making that. I know the temptation to make that move, and it's not even an intentional act to make that move because of some of the different forces in our world. But I also want to delineate between them so that we make sure we're staying in, like, what is actually persecution and what is not. And I know, some of my friends serve in very liberal areas, for example, that would be in the sense of, like, it's not okay to talk about Jesus, and you get ostracized in the office, and it's kind of treated like that. I would tell you that has not been my experience. Even as a pastor, most people are like, maybe, if they're not Christians, or like they're a little skeptical, or they're just kind of like whatever. But it's a lot of times it's just like a you do you sort of a thing. It's not to this point, and that could change, but it's not been like persecution because I'm someone who believes in God. I think that does happen in some parts, but again, that's still very different than what we're talking about that's happening in Africa, that's happening in China, that's happening across the globe.
No, I really appreciate you diving into that and explaining that, because I actually had this conversation this weekend of there's a loss of political influence of Christians, and does that mean we're being persecuted and being taken over?
Sure.
And what does that look like? And it's not been the reality for Christians for most of human history to be ruled by a government that was made up of Christians.
Yeah. And, I mean, we could get into all sorts of political theory, which I'm going to avoid, but I do want to emphasize, like, so growing up, the framework that I was handed in the church was, hey, we got to now raise all this money to send missionaries to go tell people who don't know Jesus, because they're out in the nations and God cares about the nations. And I think that's true. But part of the beauty of where we're at currently, like if we were looking for opportunity rather than fear, if we were looking for where the kingdom might be breaking in, is like, the nations are here. So like we don't even have to, I mean, we want to be involved in mission work. Please don't hear what I'm not saying. Right. But now in some senses, we all get to be missionaries in ways that wasn't a thing 100 years ago or whatever it was. Like even in our context at SVSU and the colleges around, we have a whole contingency of people that are from other countries that are then connected to other families and people who need to know God. And so I don't want to live my life being fearful of them or, living in unnecessary antagonism with them.
Right.
I want to be like, y'all need to come meet Jesus, right? Like come experience this kingdom with us. And who knows how God's going to work through that. So again, I would just want to look at it through, like, what does it mean to think of the kingdom being present and real now and wanting to break in there even.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I have one more talking point for us before our time wraps up. You ended the sermon talking about how you pray for the congregation every Sunday morning before you start. And in your prayer, you talked about preaching the foolishness of the gospel. So this is another one of those conversation points that I got to have after church. Someone approached me and said, what does he mean by foolishness of the gospel? Because they just happened to have a friend with them that was visiting for the first time.
What a Sunday to come. Let's go.
And they're processing what you said. They think they have an idea of what you're talking about, but they're processing this through the lens of this new person sitting there, and you're calling the gospel foolishness. Yeah. Explain.
Yeah, that's a great question. I almost want to, maybe I'll ask you offline, but I want to know how you responded. How did you have to try and speak for me is really the question.
I grabbed my notebook and said, I'm going to ask Josh on the podcast tomorrow so he can explain in his own words
that is
for you. So
speaking of political moves, very brilliant. I love that.
But then I did give my answer as well, but we don't need to go into that because you're sitting here. So you give your answer.
I love that. I'm quoting Paul, and Paul talks about in 1 Corinthians 1, he's writing to a church that is very messed up. And he says in verse 18, he says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, the intelligence of the intelligent I will frustrate." And he's going on. I'm just going to read a little bit more, actually. Verse 20, he goes, "Where is the wise person? Where is the teacher of the law? Where is the philosopher of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through its wisdom did not know him, God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached to save those who believe. Jews demanded signs and Greeks looked for wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to the Jews and foolishness to the Gentiles. But to those whom God has called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ, the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than human wisdom, and the weakness of God is stronger than human strength." And then he goes on from there.
And that was 1 Corinthians
1, and specifically
so somebody wants to go back and look
18
that up.
through 25, 1:18 through 25. Yeah, and so Paul is talking about this reality of two different groups. Again, plays into all of us come to Jesus on our own terms, and he's saying Jesus is a stumbling block for the Jewish people of how they thought the Messiah was supposed to come.
Mm-hmm.
The Greeks, though, they were the ones who loved wisdom. The Greeks are the ones who had all of their Greek mythology and all of these different things. And so the idea and I'm going to step out of my lane here a little bit. I think this is right. Someone can fact check me on it. I think part of what he's doing there in Greek mythology is the idea is you have like all of these super powerful gods, and the gods reign and rule over, and humans are less than sort of creatures that are just hoping to kind of get by on the whims of these on these gods. So to that type of audience, the idea that a god would come and die is foolishness. This is not who a god is. A god is the one who's all powerful and almighty. He can't be as Bonhoeffer was talking about, the sacrificial one who's on the cross. That's not how God works. And so this is the foolishness to the wise people of that day. And so then, you just kind of take that principle and you apply it today. There is a sense still where that's true. Maybe not in all the way that the Greeks would have thought about it, but where following Jesus is like, it is do you believe he's king? And are you going to live your life that way? Because that sounds foolishness compared to pursuing unlimited amounts of success or unfettered wealth or, pursuing all the pleasure that life has for us, right? And so it is the foolishness of the gospel. Do you really believe that the God of the universe would come as someone in the flesh and be willing to lay down his life to die the death, not even like a dignified death, but the death of a criminal? And that is actually God. That's the foolishness of the gospel. And that's the core of what we believe.
Yeah. Is Jesus really king?
Right.
And that ties into this whole sermon series that we've been talking about. If Jesus really isn't king, why would we live meek?
Yeah.
Why would we pursue righteousness for others instead of just pursuing for ourselves? Why would we come poor in spirit?
Paul will say in his writings, he's like, listen, if Jesus isn't who he says he is, this is all for naught.
Yeah.
I have completely wasted my life. I should be pursuing everything else that life has to offer.
Right.
And so like, that's the decision you have to make is like, do you think he's king or not? And if he's not, then quite frankly, and I mean, I don't want to push people this way because I don't think it'll actually lead to life. So please don't mishear what I'm saying. But like, if you're just going to kind of quasi believe in Jesus, what good is that to you? Like, it's not helping you.
Yeah.
Like you might as well go pursue all of whatever it is, depravity, all of the things that the world can offer you to gain. But in scripture, it's going to be like, but what is the gain of man to gain the whole world and lose his soul, right? And so I think that is the ultimate place that Jesus leads us to, and the direction his life leads, and ultimately where he's inviting us of like, do you want to go down this path of the good life? If so, you got to come and die to yourself.
Thank you. I love that. Well, I look forward to wrapping this up next week. And so stay tuned and we'll see you all next week.